Okay, now we're going to look at an example of a quantitative study based on all of been we've been learning about quantitative research. I want to see how it actually plays out in a real study. I chose Liv and Wang to look at how they remember, just a reminder from quantitative, we measure variables precisely, right, in order to discover relationships among the variables, which whether they correlate or one seems to be causing the other. We have questions or hypotheses about these. In their case, they had hypotheses. First, you have to carefully define the variables. Now, they were very careful to define four variables and to have ways of looking at them that were really precise. So, boredom proneness, how likely are you to get bored? How quickly do you get bored? Phubbing, which is when you ignore the person you're with in order to look at your phone. FOMO, which stands for fear of missing out, which I know your generation is very big on, and it's something that has been, people have figured out how to measure it. And then online vigilance. To what degree do you feel like you need to be keeping track of your social media, your texts? Some of you email, not mostly though, that's me, your DMs, right? All of that kind of stuff. How much vigilance do you feel? How are these variables measured? They need to be very precise. Well, somebody goes to all the trouble, it's an enormous amount of work, to actually develop a scale, a set of questions, usually with those Likert scales I told you about earlier, where you're, how much does this like you on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 7 or 1 to 10 or whatever. And these scales have already been developed and tested so that they have been found to be valid and reliable. And then the researchers use them to do this particular study to say, hey, does Phubbing correlate with the boredomness, as that rises, does Phubbing rise, become more likely? It's not a probability sample, interestingly enough. They just use the students they were able to get a hold of. And that's not bad, right? But it means that it does limit the generalizability. And then lastly, they made decisions on what kind of statistical tests to run, of course, when they were measuring their variables. Remember now, too, we have independent variables, the ones we manipulate. Boredom proneness is the independent variable. They say, okay, we're going to find out people who are really high on it, maybe people who are really low on it, but whatever. That's the independent one. And then depending upon where you are on that, we're going to measure the dependent variable, which is Phubbing, right? Meaning, do you ignore people in order to, because you're bored, in order, do you actually go look at your phone much more often? Now, FOMO and online vigilance, the other two variables I mentioned, in this particular study are what are called mediated variables, meaning they affect that relationship between boredom proneness and Phubbing. Don't worry about what mediating variables is. You're not required to understand that. Just know that these are two other variables that they measured. That's fine. So higher boredom proneness does lead to more Phubbing. The more likely you are to be bored, the more likely you are to ignore people who are with you. Well, so what, right? People did this study. Why does that matter? Why should you care? I'm glad you asked. You should care because of what are called the research implications, the ways in which this shapes what people do once they have this information, or hopefully you get it out to them, right? How are these useful or meaning in the real world? These are also some called takeaways, like what is the takeaway from your research, okay? And here's a great quote from page 4. Colleges and universities should actively focus on college students' leisure time, enrich extracurricular activities, and reduce students' boredom to reduce their Phubbing. What the article says is Phubbing is not particularly good for people, and there's lots of research that says to that. It's not good for your relationships and you're feeling connected to people interpersonally. And we should do a better job giving you really cool things to do together so you'll leave your phone in your pocket. I've given up hoping that you'll leave them at home, but we can maybe get you to at least leave your phone in your